Day 4 of the International Mandela Effect Conference. It is a pleasure and an honor to have every last one of you here. So, there's a couple things that we have to go over very quickly. If I can get the disclaimer on the screen, please, tech team. I appreciate that. The disclaimer we're going to go over here. The content you are about to watch is meant for thought and consideration. Please be respectful of each other and opinions shared. This is a safe space to express thoughts, ideas, and information. The views and opinions expressed by the individuals in the following program do not necessarily reflect those of every speaker or the IMEC organization or affiliates. So I am now, I'll go ahead and drop the disclaimer again, please? Thank you, ma'am. Our first speaker for today, ladies and gentlemen, I've been following her work and her e-zine for about 20 years. We go way back as far as me following her work anyway. Cynthia and I share an open-minded interest in a wide aspects of topics, including metaphysics, consciousness, and the paranormal. In addition to being a lifelong experiencer of metaphysical phenomenon, Cynthia has a degree in physics from UC Berkeley, an MBA degree, and a Doctor of Divinity. Cynthia has organized and presented scientific papers for consciousness conferences for Foundations of Mind, honoring some of the world's preeminent physicists, researchers, and scholars. Cynthia has interviewed some of the world's most cutting-edge experts in the field of quantum consciousness on her broadcast, Living the Quantum Dream, and has written best-selling books including Quantum Jumps, Reality Shifts, and High Energy Money. Cynthia is one of the founders of IMEC and sits on its board of directors, currently serving as its president. Cynthia is a quantum mystic, a quantum optimist, but most of all, a visionary who helps remind us to always remain open to seeing just how good it can get. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Cynthia Sue Larson.
Hello, this is Cynthia Sue Larson. Today I'll be talking with you about the voyage of the Mandela Effect. And my website is realityshifters.com. I'm known as the quantum optimist by some, and I'm also known as the best-selling author of 6 books, including Quantum Jumps, Reality Shifts, High Energy Money. I have an MBA degree, a Doctor of Divinity, and I am a second-degree black belt in the Korean martial art of Kuk Sool Won. I'm the founder of Reality Shifters, a managing director for Foundations of Mind, and I'm also the president of the International Mandela Effect Conference. So I'd like to start today by inviting you to consider how you relate to the unknown. A lot of us relate differently when things are not what we expected, and I think all of us have experience with that in 2020. Things are definitely not what I expected. So when you face the unknown, you have natural responses and emotional reactions. They are yours, they're correct, whatever they are. They might be surprise, shock, astonishment, sadness, joy. Could be a mix of all of these as well. Some of us love the unknown, and that usually applies to scientists. Back in 1504, there was a globe that was very small. There's a blown up picture here that I'm showing that has some Latin words in it. The words translate to, "Here are dragons." Clearly, someone exploring this kind of globe of the Earth back in 1504 recognized the fact that there would be some surprises along the way. When Charles Darwin and his crew set sail on the HMS Beagle in 1830, they embarked on a journey of the world to map the coastlines and study the animals. This was a 5-year journey, and on the way, in their very small boat, if you take a look at the plans for the boat, you'll see that it was only 90 feet by 24 feet wide. That's a small confined area to stay in for 5 years. But they stayed there until they reached islands to explore. And you can see that in the cabin picture, Charles had a larger space than some, but the whole thing was kind of a tiny space for that many people to be hanging out for that long. When Charles Darwin reported in his journal and later to other people about what he saw, he commented, "I never dreamed that islands about 50 to 60 miles apart, and most of them in sight of each other, formed of precisely the same rocks, placed under a similar climate, rising to a nearly equal height, would have been differently tenanted. Here you see one of the giant tortoises that he drew pictures of. When he came back home, he had further discoveries to make. One of them was made by his father, who noticed that the shape of his head is quite altered. Well, he'd been gone 5 years. But for those of us that study Mandela effects, that's an interesting comment. Only after Darwin returned home to sort and classify his specimens did he notice that each island had its own unique species of finches. Each island had its own species of giant tortoises as well. And this is very interesting because like we mentioned earlier, if you take a look at those islands, they have pretty similar topography. They're in a similar longitude and latitude. There's not that much different in terms of the weather or anything else, yet there are tremendously different life forms on these different islands. So when I see that, in light of the Mandela effect, I think it's very interesting. It reminds me of parallel worlds. Today we'll be looking at possible evidence of parallel worlds, looking at 5 different areas. Some of them are subjective and noticed on a personal level. Others are interesting to consider because they affect all of us. The first one will be the Mandela effect and alternate histories. Secondly, I'll be going through dissociative identity and multiple personality. Third, we'll take a look at sudden geniuses and acquired savant syndrome. Fourth, we'll go into the realm of quantum physics, take a look at Wigner's friend experiment and how it may prove different measurements observe different realities. And the last thing we'll look at today is cosmic microwave background, or CMB, and some of the information that's been coming through recently with NASA's ANITA. When we look at possible evidence of parallel worlds, we can take a look back at a large and growing body of evidence. I personally have been researching this phenomenon for over 21 years through realityshifters.com. I've been documenting firsthand reports, noting the location and the time and date when people remembered and recorded alternate histories that they personally observed. One example, I'm not going to go through a whole bunch of them, but I'm going to pick one, really big one for me, has to do with the kidney location. So this Mandela effect, you might remember that there was something called a kidney punch. If you practice martial arts like I do, then you can easily put your hands on your body right where you think that no kidney punch rule would apply to, so that no one would punch you in your kidneys. And if you thought about it, put your hands in the right place, good. Well, I've got a very interesting report from a 1914 U.S. Navy publication, and in it basically covers the same thing I remember. It says Sally made the most of the no kidney punch, and whenever the going got heavy, he would rush into a clinch and turn his exposed back and kidneys up, a la roll top desk. The sailor would raise his glove and then change his mind about smashing it down on Salvador. He wanted to swat Sally's back so bad he could taste it. So that's showing us where it is. This picture illustrates the location of where you may have put your hands on your lower back, and that is where a lot of us remember the kidneys used to be. Now, if you look it up, you can easily see that the kidneys have moved quite a bit upward and in a more protected area under the rib cage than most of us ever remember before. Other possible evidence of parallel worlds include an example such as Herschel Walker, who is a self-acknowledged multiple personality person. It's known as dissociative identity disorder now, or multiple personality disorder, but this may not be a disorder. The book that I'm reading currently, that's not released yet, but it will be soon, is Your Symphony of Selves. And it's published by the authors Fadiman and Gruber, and they pick up where so many other philosophers, psychologists, and scientists have frequently acknowledged that we are not just one personality inside of ourselves. There are many of us. As Herschel Walker noted, the same person who is on the football field is not the same person you would see running a business. They may be in the same body. Herschel Walker was acknowledged as being remarkable for winning the Heisman Trophy. He not only played football, though, he played lots of other sports, and he was doing some martial arts in there as well, lots of things. And so when you look at all the accomplishments that he made and his own acknowledgement, he has multiple personalities. They can be quite effective in our daily life. Again, that book, Symphony of Selves, stigmatizes the whole phenomenon and says maybe this can be quite healthy. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but probably all of us are not the same person when we go to the dentist, as we're a parent with our children, as we are a neighbor to other neighbors, and so forth. Each time we go out in the world, we're usually a little bit different than in another place of our life. Next, I'd like to take a look at this possible evidence of parallel worlds in what's known as the sudden genius or acquired savant syndrome. An example of this is Tony Sikora, and he's an orthopedic surgeon originally, until he was hit by lightning. He was on the phone at a family gathering or something like that when a lightning struck the house that he was in. The current went right through the telephone and physiologically had a tremendous impact on him. So what happened next is he became a pianist and a composer, but his skill and his passion for this piano playing seemed to have come out of almost nowhere. And that's why he wrote a book, The Notes from an Accidental Pianist and Composer. And it's obvious to anybody who's had that kind of a life-changing experience that you can literally go from one set of skills and knowledge and personality, really, to quite another one. It can be a good thing. Next, I'd like to introduce the idea of the Wigner's friend experiment from quantum physics. So this Wigner's friend experiment is possible evidence of parallel worlds because the original experiment was a thought experiment, and it had to do with Schrödinger's cat, which was placed in a box with a vial of poison in a capsule, and the triggering device was completely randomized based on radioactive decay, a quantum process. So this basically put the cat, when it's that hooked up to a quantum system, Schrödinger himself was commenting, this is kind of ridiculous, because now the cat, it's either alive or dead. It's kind of both. It's in a superposition of states. That's a quantum sort of a phenomenon. So Wigner came along, another physicist, looking at Schrödinger's experiment, and said, now let's entangle the entire experimental apparatus, the cat, with an observer who has seen whether the cat is alive or dead. Have we changed the experiment by observing it? So this is the idea that when you've got layers of observation, things can change. In 2019, an experiment that was conducted in 2018 was published. Researchers Proietti and Bruckner, working in collaboration between the universities of Edinburgh, Scotland, and also in, let's see, I didn't write down where they're from, but I'm trying to remember. Oh, Austria, that's right, Vienna, Austria. So basically, they looked at how two realities can be observed to coexist. Simultaneous measurements were taken at the same time and exact same place, observing two very, very different experimental conditions. So, for example, it was possible with this experimental device to prove without any question, and it's a very repeatable experiment, that we absolutely can show that there can be two observational devices at the same place, at the same time, literally witnessing two completely different things. And when we acknowledge that, we're basically giving a lot of credence to the fact that some of us, even within our own lives, might be sometimes experiencing something differently. We see it one way, come back, and it's different. Two different observers may notice two different things happening at the same place, at the same time. This is a quantum kind of a phenomenon. And then lastly, the other piece of possible evidence for parallel worlds I'd like to discuss today is the cosmic background radiation. So this cosmic microwave background has been observed, well, first what it is. It's a picture, basically, of the starting conditions of the Big Bang. That's the purpose of it. What it is, it's all of the background radiation, kind of like if you took a thermo heat picture of a room and you're taking a photograph maybe after someone people had been sitting in certain chairs. You don't know which chairs. You take a heat picture of the room after everyone's left, and then you develop the film, take a look at it, and you can see which chairs were probably sat in, at least by a warm body, by the heat in the chairs. So when we look at a cosmic microwave background photograph, we can see pretty much the equivalent. We can see hot spots and cold spots. There is a tremendously large cold spot in the cosmic microwave background of our universe. And this indicates that there could have possibly been a collision with another universe. So that's one possibility. The second piece of information coming from Parallel Worlds and NASA comes from something known as the Antarctic Impulsive Transient Antenna, ANITA, a fancy name for transporting a balloon around the South Pole. And what they found were high energy particles which were coming out of the Earth in a very impossible way, because these kind of high energy particles, they don't usually go through something like the Earth. It's not really possible. So if they're coming out, it means possibly time is running backward. Maybe we're seeing evidence of a parallel universe where time is going the opposite direction from what we're used to. It's an interesting idea. I'd like to talk now about my cousin Johnny. He's a very distant cousin. We share a 10th great-great-grandfather of mine, Thomas Wheeler, who lived 1561 to 1635, right after that Here Be Dragons globe existed. And that was our shared ancestor. I'm really talking about John Archibald Wheeler, the very famous physicist. Here he is in company of Albert Einstein, Hideki Yukawa, and they're talking about what else? Physics. So I hope. Anyway, this was John Archibald Wheeler's 8th great-great-grandfather. And what's so remarkable about John Archibald Wheeler to me is that he loved the unknown. He said, if you haven't found something strange during the day, it hasn't been much of a day. Some of his ideas that became wildly popular, I know you've heard of. They include black holes, which he popularized, wormholes, and delayed choice within the participatory universe, and also the idea of it from bit. So if you're talking about the Mandela Effect, and you're talking about, is it simulating something, what's going on, you absolutely are working with some of the ideas of John Archibald Wheeler. My book, Quantum Jumps, has a cover illustration on the front, which is showing basically a wormhole where in some fashion we, in the form of consciousness, look like we might be moving from one reality to another. Now, John Archibald Wheeler did not directly discuss Mandela Effect, but some of these ideas that he did discuss are extremely relevant. He also said that the past only exists when recorded and observed. The applicable quote reads, "It begins to look like we ourselves, by a last-minute decision, have an influence on what a photon will do when it has already accomplished most of its doing. We have to say that we ourselves have an undeniable part in shaping what we have always called the past. The past is not really the past until it has been registered. Or put another way, the past has no meaning or existence unless it exists as a record in the present." This is quoted from a book, The Ghost in the Atom, Cambridge University Press. And when we look at how we are explorers in the quantum age, just as Darwin saw different species on different islands, Mandela Effect experiencers see different subjective realities, as we can expect from some of the research we've been looking at. Subjective observation invites us to ask questions and make hypotheses we can test. So when we observe Mandela effects, I like to look at it as we can think of it as a timeline, XYZ. When you record the incident or the Mandela effect or the personal reality shift experience, be sure to record the point why, when and where you first noticed a reality shift. That's your first awareness, like, wow, something's different here. That means that there's an earlier point, X, when and where the events may have changed. You might have a clue as to when that was, you might not. But you might have an idea. And then you can also make note of a time Z that you are documenting this report. So all of these things matter. the report. Y and Z are usually pretty clear. When it actually changed may not be. In the case where it's just sort of background stuff, sometimes it is clear. Now I'd like to bring up the work of Art Bell. He was a remarkable audio personality on the radio. He often was everybody's favorite late night talk show host on Coast to Coast AM. He had a discussion back in April 2001 where he discussed the Mandela Effect. And at that point, he was saying that even way long before that, there had been so many faxes, and there weren't so many emails at that time, but phone calls and faxes describing people's reports that they remember Nelson Mandela had died, and it was so strange to them that he was alive again. It's possible one of the callers or Art Bell himself may have said Mandela Effect, but for any reason, it took a number of years later before the term caught on. But I just want to give him credit because he interviewed me. We talked about this. In that interview with me, he talked about this April 2001 date and how even by that point in time, he'd been hearing for about a decade lots of reports. His theory was that time travelers might be doing something. He had a lot of theories, but I think Art Bell's favorite theory about the Mandela Effect had to do with time travel. He wondered, could time travelers be influencing current events? I wonder, if they were, how might we recognize them? And I know we look at photos and so forth, but let's take a look to see what else might be going on from inside of it. Now we're going to go time jump again to 1770. We're doing some time travel already in this talk. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe saw his future self. He said, "I was riding on the footpath toward Drusenheim, and there one of the strangest presentiments occurred to me. I saw myself coming to meet myself on the same road, on horseback, but in clothes such as I had never worn. They were light gray mixed with gold. As soon as I had aroused myself from the daydream, the vision disappeared. Strange, however, it is that 8 years later, I found myself on the identical spot, intending to visit Frederica once more, and in the same clothes which I had seen in my vision, and which I now wore, not from choice, but by accident." And so the context of this experience was that Johann had been going to visit the same person at two different points in time, and he had seen his future self. As he came to realize, he actually wrote this down. I know that this happens a lot more than people do write down. I know this because some of these reports are in the body of evidence on the realityshifters.com website that I've been documenting for over 20 years. And I've met people in talks that I give that mention this. In 1951, Philip K. Dick saw his future self. He said, "I was asleep one night and I woke up and there was a figure standing at the edge of the bed, looking down at me. I grunted in amazement, and all of a sudden, my wife woke up and started screaming because she could see it too. She started screaming, but I recognized it, and I started reassuring her, saying that it was me that was there and not to be afraid." And I like this example by Philip K. Dick. Many of you know he is the author of some of the movies that have come out in recent years, such as Blade Runner and so many others. Man in the High Castle series. These were basically his observations that literal parallel worlds could exist. He was a believer in the idea. In 1978, I saw my future self. I've written about this in my book Reality Shifts. When I was 16, I saw my future self enter my room, and this was right after I'd gone to bed. So I was lying down in my bed. I can't remember if I'd already closed my eyes or if I was still looking around at the room because I had posters on the wall. But anyway, someone who looked just like me but older, and she seemed to know me, walked out of my full-length mirror closet doors, sort of float walked across the room. She was kind of solid, but not really. And she walked all the way over to my roll-top desk, where she seemed to be opening up the lower left drawer. She removed something, and the whole time she was thinking things to me. I was talking to her out loud, because I think I was kind of groggy, and I was wondering, what are you doing here? Who are you? What's going on? What are you getting? I knew she was me, but it was the weirdest thing. And then she went back the way she came, And I'm still thinking, what is happening here? And then the door opened. It was my father. He peered in the dark room that I was lying in and asked, "Are you all right?" And I didn't know what to say. I think so, but I think I'm talking to my future self. Anyway, the next morning, there were some letters missing from my roll-top desk. I knew that I'd seen my future self, but this still made no logical sense. So I directly went to wake up my sister and accused her of stealing the letters from my desk since the night before, which she denied. And then later I realized that sounds crazy. Why would she do that? Obviously, it was my future self. That's a very interesting interaction. This brings up the mysterious nature of time, because those kind of time experiences, they're very extraordinary when they happen to you. You become keenly fascinated by them. Albert Einstein said the distinction between the past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. I'm showing an illustration here in this image of the sundial sculpture that was a gift to the city of Berkeley, where I live, from a sister city in Japan. And there's a caption and an inscription on this, which I include in my book, Reality Shifts. I find it very interesting that this was one of the first real Mandela effects, if you want to call it that I ever experienced with friends, because we were walking to have brunch at the place we commonly went to at the Berkeley Marina. And this sundial sculpture, if it had been there on previous occasions, we would have had to change the route that we always walked at that time, because we used to walk right through the plaza where it now resides. Not only that, but if it had been there, we wouldn't have been able to see so clearly another sculpture, which was right positioned behind it, an archer riding on horseback. And so this is remarkable, because my friends and I were talking about reality shifts when we first saw this. It represents time and space. I think it's also very interesting because Christopher Anatra, the quantum businessman, also has noticed the significance of a sundial on the side of a house that hadn't been there before. So I think the symbolism is extremely noteworthy and meaningful when we look for revelations of the Mandela Effect. Albert Einstein said, "Time and space and gravitation have no separate existence from matter." There are some things we can learn when we look at relativity and the subjectivity of time, that there is no universal present for all observers. It changes. The way we experience time has a lot to do with where we are. Time goes a lot faster when you are in a very high mountain on the earth. Not so much that we would observe it, but it's been measured by atomic clocks. Quantum wave functions allow for multiple possibilities or universes. And this is interesting because when you look at a photon and you see that it has the property of quantum superposition, like Schrödinger's cat in the box, alive or dead, a photon can be in that superposition of states when you look at its motion, or you put it in some kind of an indefinite order of operations. So it might be going, for example, 2 different directions at once. When we look at what human beings know about time, and you go to the indigenous wisdom of ancient years, many indigenous people recognize nonlinear time. They note that we experience cycles of time. They sometimes note that we can view time as a spiral through evolving cycles of change. And this is an illustration from Ireland, and it's beautiful art, but it also can give you the idea that time goes through cyclical seasons, but the Earth is revolving on its axis. It also goes in an orbit around the sun, and the entire dynamic conglomeration of the Milky Way is also moving. Everything's moving through time, very much in spirals. And I think the indigenous people noticed that. One of the researchers of the experience of time is John William Dunn. In his 1927 book, An Experiment with Time, Dunn presented an idea of 3 dimensions of time. Yeah, he called them T1, T2, and T3, and he drew graphs and pictures and illustrations and has paragraph after paragraph describing what he means. But basically, what he's talking about is that observation of events are possible by various levels of observers. So I'm going to go to show you an illustration of observers of time-traveling fields. And that's the key. It's the idea that your level of observation, it's what you identify with, might even be an aspect of yourself, can change. Based on that change in your observational status, you can have a completely different experience of events, a very different experience. And it's a little bit complicated, shall we say, but I think just looking at the idea, letting it sink in, you can start taking a look. And I recommend the book, An Experiment with Time, because it does describe how most people that this researcher, John William Dunn, was studying were able to have precognitive dreams. They were able to get anomalous time experiences pretty frequently. Going back to Philip K. Dick, the American author, he is remarkable in the sense that he also had his own idea of time. Remember, he was another person who was visited by a future self. He said that an orthogonal or right-angled time axis could exist, a lateral domain in which change takes place, processes occurring sideways in reality, so to speak. This is almost impossible to imagine. How would we perceive such lateral changes? What would we experience? This brings us to the more modern day idea of closed timelike curves, or CTC. And these closed timelike curves, they are paths of space-time, and they return to their starting point. So the curve it does kind of a loop. The existence of these closed timelike curves is allowed by Einstein's general relativity, although it was predicted in 1937 by William Jacob von Stockham, and further elaborated by the mathematician Kurt Gödel in 1949. And you can imagine that if you were doing some kind of time travel, you could make a jump from today to tomorrow, kind of skip everything in between if you had such a closed time-like curve. You could think of it as perhaps a tear in the space-time continuum. This shows up in a lot of science fiction. David Deutsch suggests resolution of the grandfather paradox, which would happen if you think that there's only one possible history, or rather, only one possible world where everybody would be going back to inhabit. So instead of having just one world where all these time travelers would end up, David Deutsch, not that he's so much talking about time travel per se, but he theorized in 1991 that paradoxes created by closed time-like curves could be avoided at the quantum scale because of the behavior of fundamental particles, which follow only the fuzzy rules of probability rather than strict determinism. This means you could start in world 2, and when you go back in time, you're in world 3. So what you do there doesn't suddenly make you disappear, because you still have your history. You still have your grandfather. So even if something that you did inadvertently resulted in the demise or non-existence of your grandfather, it's fine. You're still here thanks to World 2. And my friend and physicist and the quantum doctor, Fred Alan Wolf, his take on Deutsch's closed time-like curves is that mixed states that are represented by diagonal density matrices in quantum physics, but probability distributions in classical physics. So these are mixed. They have a little bit of both, a little bit quantum, a little bit classical. They are just what arise when an observation is said to occur, resulting in a so-called reduction of the quantum wave function and the appearance of a classical world. So if you look at this closely, you'll recognize we can have our cake and eat it too. We can have these kind of time anomalies and live in a world that seems pretty real. Fred Alan Wolf's take on David Deutsch's closed time-like curves is shown in this illustration, which is a figure from one of Wolf's papers, as the multiverse, as perhaps envisioned by David Deutsch, connected by these closed time-like curve wormholes. So when you introduce the combination of these time-like curves, the wormholes, and this nonlinear quantum physics model, you start to see what it could look like to have the action of a conscious mind. Delayed choice means that we influence the past. And I want to talk about delayed choice because this is another kind of time travel, if you will, where you can perhaps change what you had for breakfast this morning. And this is the kind of thing that those of us who experience the Mandela effect aren't going to think sounds as crazy as it might sound to some people, thanks to us experiencing quite a bit of what seems like quantum phenomena. So if you look at delayed choice in the physics realm, they have experiments that show versions of the double slit experiment that exist and demonstrate choices made in the future can absolutely influence past events. So this is done with beam splitters, delay devices, and it means that you can make a future choice whether you're looking to make a measurement in one place or another. Of course, when you combine the ideas of quantum physics with the classical world, that gets very interesting. And this is like an arm wrestling match experiment that happened to see who would win. Is the quantum physics space captain going to win, or will the classical-minded space captain win? So the experiment that was conducted here had to do with time existing in a state of quantum superposition. That was the idea. So it's a thinking experiment. Can the sequence of events become quantum mechanical? Well, cause and effect can coexist in both the forward and the backward direction. So that means, yes, you can have a retrocausal effect. In an imaginary starship battle, a planet could be placed closer to one ship, a clever maneuver by the other captain, because that will slow down its response speed and reaction speed. So if they were in like a shootout at the OK Corral for two starship captains, the one who's aware of the quantum capabilities and is able to maneuver that superposition of states so that he ends up in the reality where his opponent is next to a large body of matter that slows his response time, then the quantum-minded captain will win. Which brings us to the idea, what's going on with the Mandela effect? What is this revelation bringing us? One thing I notice is it seems like this is definitely an exceptional human experience. Because for any of us who notice that the kidneys have moved, or even if a product label has changed, not to mention meeting your future self, any of these things are sufficient to bring one to a place of consciousness where you can't ignore this kind of thing quite so easily. And all of humanity right now is getting the benefit of this experience, even those who aren't looking that closely. Because at some point, something will happen, most likely, where they put something down where they know they put it, they come back and it's gone, and they look up what's going on. Or they notice that a product name has changed, or a movie line of dialogue has changed. So when I ask the question, why is the Mandela effect happening? I pointed out in my book, Reality Shifts, the answer is because. It's just inviting us to be the cause, to take on the observer role, and thereby be that quantum captain, be the one who's aware that there's a superposition of states existing in your life right now. You can feel them, those possibilities, thanks to your imagination. I feel that we also see a revelation in the Mandela effect, because we can see that we are made truly in a creator's image, the creator's image. We're creative by the very virtue of our ability to observe and to be cause. When we imagine positive futures and pasts, that's using that imagination in a positive way. We can befriend our many selves. We don't need to look at multiple personality as a disorder necessarily. There are now more celebrities coming out and stepping forward to say they too have this. It can be beneficial. What, as the book that's coming out later this year will mention, Your Symphony of Selves, you can work with these internal selves and find a way to bring out the best. You can also envision that your best possible future self is guiding, inspiring, and protecting you, and know that you are having a lot to do with making that so. You can therefore build resilience at the time of the coronavirus. You can master the art of time travel. This illustration I've got here on this slide is actually from an article in the New York Times in May 2020, advocating time travel through the imagination. So this is not as far out an idea as it may have seemed in the past. And I think most of us at this point can realize, even if you haven't literally seen your future self, you can start working with the idea that you do have one. We do live in a participatory universe with delayed choices that my cousin, John Archibald Wheeler, talked about. He suggested, first, remember that you live in a participatory universe. That means that what you're observing, your very choice of how you make that observation is changing everything. It's changing what you observe. It's changing what's going on. Also, we make delayed choices that affect the past. These are delayed choices. John Archibald Wheeler theorized this could happen. It's been proven in physics experiments. I love to take a look at a quote by Carl Jung at this point, because he also understood the idea that we have access to many levels of self. And he said synchronicity is an ever-present reality for those who have eyes to see. I've noticed that synchronicity is a lot more present in my life when I'm recognizing that I'm very much having a role in participating in what's going on by keeping my mental state positive, aware of all of the different possibilities that are in play. And I like to ask that question, how good can it get? So in the self-aware universe, we recognize we are moving from habit-based observer participants. And we're moving out of that role. This is a very subtle thing, but we're moving away from just being a passive, sort of a habit-based observer, but in the passive sense of it, to being much more participatory. So the idea of becoming a participatory observer is that you actually recognize that the way that you're looking at things, what you're choosing to look for, may be having an effect in what's unfolding. You can be a scientist. You can see if this is true or not. So you don't have to take my word for it. You can have that experimental spirit and be a little fearless of the unknown. Give it a try. If you keep asking how good can it get, you'll tend to steer your ship in a good direction. Last conference that we had for the International Mandela Effect Conference, that was held in the surprise moment, and it's fun to see that. I'm not going to explain, so it's worth seeing it. That's just make a note of that moment, so when you see it again, you'll be like, ah, oh my gosh. Okay, and where I'd like to bring this entire presentation to a close is with the idea that we are the time travelers that we've been looking for. We know we're in a participatory universe. We know that we can and do make delayed choices all the time. And in doing so, we discover a whole new side of ourselves. So we've been recommending all these different ways of doing this in this presentation today. I hope you got some good ideas. I've got lots more in the books I've written and my website, which has a free newsletter with lots of ideas and firsthand reports. But the big idea is right now, from this very moment, you can recognize you're making these choices, you're changing things, you're having a lot to do by the choices you make right now with even what happened earlier in your life. So to close, I'd just like to invite all of you to ask the question in every situation, how good can it get? Thank you so much. This is Cynthia Sue Larson with RealityShifters.com and the International Mandela Effect Conference.
A little bit of a hiccup there at the end. That was so funny. I think our higher selves were playing with us a little bit on the delayed choice synchronicity we got with that. But wonderful presentation. Super excited, Cynthia.
Yeah, that was a great little opportunity to talk about glitches. Kind of funny.
Absolutely. So yeah, we get a lot of those, and I do want to, thank a little bit of a hiccup there at the end. That was so funny. I think our higher selves were playing with us a little bit on the delayed choice synchronicity we got with that. But wonderful presentation. So thank you guys. Super excited. All of you guys behind the scenes running this, we appreciate. Yeah, that was a great little opportunity to talk about Cynthia, glitches. We got a lot of questions, and of course. All right, you guys, we are reporting live from the vortex. So, all right, so we're going to try this again. Cynthia Sue Larson, just finishing up, and we were going into the first question, but really you had a little bit before we even went to the question. So
yes, I did.
All the way up. We don't want to miss any of that.
Well, it's fine. And hopefully this works this time.
Thanks for sticking with us, you guys. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Well, a lot of people that work with this stuff know that weird technical abnormalities can happen, so it's common. I was saying, as I recall, that I love combining the discussion about one of my favorite topics, which is this whole idea of time shifting, together. I got an opportunity to do some research with genealogy for this presentation, which I love. And I am familiar with the Mandela Effect, reality shifts, of course. So when I do something like research that passed going hundreds of years back, I'm aware that things can change quite a bit. I'm also aware that I might end up with connections. What I look for, I can find. I know that. So I know that the past might be changing just by virtue of looking through it. So who knows whether or not I used to be connected to John Archibald Wheeler, but I'm glad to see that I am now. And I recognize that as a possible Mandela effect in itself. So that's kind of cool on the inside track. For those of you that understand and appreciate the reality shift phenomenon and Mandela effects already, you can have fun with hobbies like this. It's like a relaxing jigsaw puzzle for me. But I also love it because it's got that reality shifting Mandela effect flavor, which I enjoy.
Yeah, it really is exciting when people can get over that initial shock, because it can be shocking right at first. But once you see everything's okay and the world's not falling apart or whatever, you can really have some fun with it. And it really can be a ton of fun. So I want to go back to the first question and repeat it again from Daisy. Do you experience simple miracles like not having moles in your yard or house dust or appliances failing? Things like that.
Yes. I mean, that's not to say that I don't still have problems. I mean, I actually have moles in the yard and gophers right now, but they're kind of annoying. But I notice lots and lots of little miracles happening all the time too. All the time, a lot more than most people recognize, to the point that, for example, if I need to phone somebody and the line is busy, even back in the day before there was anything like call waiting and that didn't exist, I would be able to just break through, and they would wonder, how did you do that? And that was not an operator assisted, can you break through emergency? That's just breaking through. And you can hear both people on the other. It's like I joined a party line. And I'm just saying, excuse me, I just need to let you know I need to get a hold of you. You can call me back. No problem.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And then once my father, he was frustrated. He'd spent like more than an hour on the phone, and he was just getting to the end of his rope on that. And I asked, would you like help with that? That's something I'm actually pretty good at, is helping. And he'd seen that I'd helped printers work and so forth. So it's his attitude is, if it works, let's do it. So he said, sure, why not? So I just focused my attention, like he needs to get through. Boom, the phone rang on the other end. He was instantly right through. So you could say it's a coincidence, but these things, to me, they happen with remarkable regularity. And, you know, I just feel like the higher the vibe, as you know, the more of these miracles you tend to see. So I'm glad you're here, Shane, because you can vouch for me on this.
Oh yeah. In fact, didn't you have the story about, I think you're at like your sister's or something, and the dishwasher broke or something, like in the middle of an event?
Yes. This happened at my parents' house, and we had on the year earlier, prior event, there had been a dishwasher failure that ended up with replacing that unit. And so here it is happening again. The whole experience seems to be unfolding very similarly. And it was kind of that horrifying moment where you shut the dishwasher door, push the button, and it makes this clunk noise. There was actually a smell like fumes, like burnt oil. And there was the noise, the smell, a little puff of smoke. It was bad. And my sister just looked at me in horror, and then she said, can you do that thing you do? Which I loved it. It cracked me up. So then my vibes are way high. I'm laughing. I'm like, yeah, let's do it. I just described the steps. Like, okay, all we have to do is just picture that we need this. There's no question in our mind. You know we need it. She was like, mm-hmm. I said, I know we need it. So we got that. Then just feel how much you love the dishwasher. And then picture this is it running. Just picture it clearly. Because I'm just going to open this door now. I'm going to shut it. I'm going to push that button, and it's going to work. And indeed it did, even though there was still that slight odor of, burnt oil in the room. And that was really remarkable because it had made a horrible clunk noise. And, fun.
and that's really funny because I see that a lot in our community where people are sort of looked at like sort of the crazy one, but whenever something really breaks out, they're the ones everybody goes to. So.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm going to say the same thing. Exactly.
Yeah, you've seen that too, right, Chris? Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen those type of things, but even that whole concept where you express different things that you've observed and different, knowledge you have access to. And at first it's like, okay, who is this person? Then when things start to happen to someone else, it's like, we need to find you, like what, to get your point of view. So, and that's how it is for a lot of people in our community. A lot of people will be going to them to ask for help, to understand what's going on.
Especially with our good attitude, like those of us here, we've got that attitude. We love the unknown. So we're going into it cheerful, happy, joyful, playful, creatively.
Yeah. And we're really feeding off of each other,
Absolutely.
Okay, let's see. We're going to go to the next one by Lucky Bulger. Do you think the Earth is shrinking and we seem to be on an earlier version of the Earth? The geography or geographical changes also seem to follow patterns like the Fibonacci. That's a great question. Do you think we could have morphed back to an earlier Earth where it hasn't expanded, I guess?
This is where I wish we had Dale Dufay with us with his excellent take on terrors of the Milky Way. So I'm just going to reference that point, everyone. If you really want to explore that question, my recommendation is get the book. That's Dale Dufay. He's got a YouTube channel. Check it out. It's awesome. I know that some people may think that's far out. However, in this community, that's not far out to me. I'd say, why not? Anything's really possible. And I think I'd love to hear more about it. This is not my specialty, but I would definitely defer. This is where I'd be saying, okay, I'm in the hot seat here, Dale, help me out.
Yeah. Let's see. Do you want to take a stab at it, Christopher?
Sure. I've got some questions here. This one is from Bella Virgo. Is there any way we can remember a certain event so that we can prove there has been a Mandela effect by having certain observational skills?
This is one of my favorite questions, actually. I'm just going to say that right from the start. I'll tell you why. Because this gets into the heart of observation itself. And for that, I like to take a look at a very ancient old philosopher. And that's his name is Wilhelm Gottfried Leibniz. And sorry, I'm just flicking on. My lights just failed. I had to shut my computer down because I'm often the source of those glitches we saw earlier. So now, never mind. Just fixing lights. Ignore the man behind the curtain. Okay. So yes, back to Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. This guy is amazing. Not only did he invent the notation that we use when we do calculus, he also independently came up with calculus. So he was one of the two gentlemen that came up with the idea. Calculus is important because it involves levels of observational awareness. Just like he had a theory about consciousness that said there's a first level of perception. And in his envisioning of what consciousness is, consciousness requires not just that you're sensing something like you're touching a pen, but that you're aware. You've got a second order of awareness that you're touching that pen. So that's where, in his viewpoint, the consciousness comes in. I'm going to take it a step further because you're just at flatland when you've got just that one thing. We're Mandela affected. We're going another level. What are we doing? We're not only sensing and touching that pen and aware that we're touching the pen, but we're reflecting on the reflection that we've done that. And sometimes we're getting a little bit of that feedback that we actually experienced today, as if to say, hey, take a look at this. We're reflecting on the reflection. So this is the biggest question anybody could have asked. So hats off to Bella Virgo. And I want to go a little bit further too, because it's not just the reflecting on the reflection aspect, but it means that, let's see, I wrote that question down too. Can we prove there was a Mandela effect? Okay, the proving of it, okay, that gets a little sticky because our science is not caught up yet with the fact that we've left flatland. We're no longer in flatland. We're actually having not just the observation that we've touched something, but we've got the perception of it, and the perception of it. We've gone to like 3D reality for the first time. I know we think we're there, but actually when it comes to the levels of perception, we're just hitting it now. So can we prove it with the science that we have right now? No, not really. You have to take a look at science like Rupert Sheldrake, who was referenced earlier by, I think, one of our earliest talks. Chronos Mago brought up his name. Rupert Sheldrake is brilliant for hypothetically envisioning different kinds of experimental systems and setups that could possibly provide us with the kind of information that could answer that question. But until we get over some of the assumptional problems based on classical science, the way that we've been running it, we've got beliefs at the foundation of this sort of rotting foundation of old science. It's not working anymore because we have non-local things happening. That means there's this interconnectedness, whereas classical science assumes that there's no non-local effect possible, that you can have someone observing. Number two, classical science believes in an objective observer. That I touched on the scientific report here in this very talk, that just last year in 2019, the work of those two researchers, Proietti and Bruckner, proved that you can have those two observers in the same place at the same time. So there's nothing objective anymore. We saw that already in quantum physics. There's a couple of other assumptions that are broken as well. Let's not go, is materialism and the fact that we think we know exactly where something is. We can't, we don't. So there's uncertainty, there's non-locality, there's definitely subjectivity. This is just really blowing apart all of the way we've done science. What does that mean? That means when you prove things with the science that we've got, you can't really do it right now. That's the true elephant in the room. And I think that's really the beauty of Dark Wolf's talk when he was presenting that earlier.
Okay, so I kind of got a follow-up that's really on topic here. When you think of the way research has typically been done, it's very left brain, analytical, very structured, you know, and that's sort of been my problem with looking at this Mandela effect from the beginning, is you can't really look at it that way because it's so subjective. You got to get so many other people's experiences, and then you have to determine how seriously those people take what they remember as being 100%. You know, do they take it as seriously as you do? Can they say they're only 99% sure if they're not 100? You know what I mean? And there's so many variables that you know, you have to consider when you've included other people. So my question is, could you have a type of experiment like at the end of my presentation? I don't know if you guys were able to catch it because I know we're really busy, but I showed how the live broadcast of me showing the map had 2 more islands on there from the time that I actually did the live stream. So anyone who was witness to that live stream, or anyone who's watched it since then, can see me skip over these 2 islands as I'm pointing out every island on the screen. So, I mean, can you have some kind of group experiment like that, just like that, where we all agree, I've pointed out every island on there. So if we come back to this and there's more islands added to this, like what happened, you know, more structured to where it could be accepted by the scientific community.
And
like
again,
how many
we have
people would you need, you know?
Yeah. Okay. Here's the deal. We can do. I love it, and from the standpoint of like doing our own little thing, and we can do our own research. Great. But as soon as you start saying like we're going to publish this in a refereed scientific journal, that's going to be problematic for all the reasons that all of this material is problematic. We're actually showing evidence, and I'm so glad you brought that up because I missed it. You're right. Right at the end of your talk, I was switching over so that my sound wouldn't interfere. Thank you. And I haven't had a chance to catch up yet with all the talks. I'm so glad that you did that in your talk. Brilliant.
Yeah, it was a little add-on right at the end. It happened after I completed it, and I was like, oh, I've got to show people this, because I know a lot of people from the last conference saw that video where I was pointing it out. Even Christopher, I don't know if you got a chance to catch it, the presentation, but you saw that live stream about the map. So yeah, it'd be cool for you to check it out too.
Yeah, in fact, I'm so intrigued by the geography changes. I actually bought a globe that I have on my desk over here. And I'm constantly looking at it to see like when things change from my memory. And yeah, I'm spotting all kinds of things, like even how close Italy is now coming to Albania, or how tiny Iceland is. It used to be much bigger than now. Greenland is huge and Iceland is just a tiny little place. So yeah, all these types of things. But it's really the observer, like each one of us individually that's observing it, that's being able to make those connections. But to me, it helps me signal when there's been a timeline shift, as well as other things, but that's one of the things too. So I'm totally intrigued by the whole geography and how islands are appearing that weren't there before. That's very intriguing because some of those islands I'd like to go visit. Is there something on those islands? You know, it's really fascinating.
I feel the same way.
And would you just have to have scientists do it for them to accept it? Like have a room full of scientists observe something and then...
Okay. Well, the way science works, it's basically there's this hypothesis, then you test the hypothesis and you have this physical proof. But the thing is, what we're noticing is our memories are different than the proof that we're seeing. So the kind of evidence we're collecting is the sort of thing Rupert Sheldrake has been noticing, that the global standards are changing, and we're also seeing throughout all of science that science experiments are not repeatable. We can't get the same results again.
So we're needing a new methodology, right?
We absolutely need to take into effect these quantum consciousness changes. We have not incorporated quantum consciousness into the scientific model in any way, shape, or form to be able to do the kind of research we need to do. So, there it is.
There's my globe. Yeah, it's called a MOVA globe. It has a special fluid within a fluid, and it operates by sunlight. So the more sunlight it gets, the faster it spins. But yeah, I'm always looking at it all the time.
That is really cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. Okay, so let's see here. The next one I got is from AJ, Rippin' Rabbit Hole. If Anita, a parallel universe, maybe he's voice texting me, universe was discovered where the law of physics are reversed from Earth,
right,
and time goes backwards in
right.
death, are we moving towards our birth?
Okay, good question. Okay, the evidence that we saw with Anita, which is that little balloon floating around over Antarctica, it's called Anita, which stands, I forget what it stands for. I wrote it down somewhere so I'd remember, but NASA's, it's Antarctic Impulsive Transient Antenna. So it stands for Anita. Basically, it's a fancy name for a balloon. But it's not the balloon that matters. It's the little detection device. And what it's detecting is that these particles are moving all the way through the Earth, which should not be possible. They're coming out of the Earth. And in the way that they're moving, it indicates that there's a possibility that there might be this other reality, really, where time does run backwards. There have been conjecture and hypotheses about this before. I've spoken with my friend and researcher, Dr. Quantum, Fred Alan Wolf, and he's told me that, obviously there are various mechanisms by which this might be possible. And that I've talked about that for years with Fred. So obviously now we're seeing some evidence that this could be happening, but does it mean that we ourselves are going backwards like Benjamin Button or something? No. So you're not going to end up in diapers, and not the infant kind anyway. Hopefully none. But
so it sounds like it's more like something else is sort of moving around us in reverse time. Is that correct? Like we're moving our direction, but it's sort of passing us like one might pass us on the highway, right?
Right now, it's a total mystery. There's no way to explain it within current scientific models per se. So it's open to conjecture, and that's where you might have seen it in some of the media where they're reporting like, what is this? Is there a universe running backwards right next to ours? So that's what they're talking about. Doesn't mean that we're going to start suddenly going in reverse time. At least there's no reason to suspect that would be the case.
And I'd just like to ask Cynthia your opinion too. Talking about Antarctica, do you remember that the public could travel to Antarctica?
I remember they could not. There was some reason for that, but I can't remember clearly what it was. Apparently now, I was really surprised to hear a good friend of mine said, well, cruises are shutting down this year in 2020, but I'm planning to go to Antarctica. I was like, what?
Yeah, exactly. Even John, who owns Frontline, the company that's putting this together, about a year ago, I talked to him about that because it was completely new to me because I always wanted to go to Antarctica, but because, only the military and approved scientists could go. And he was telling me, oh yeah, some of my friends went there last year and they loved it. They had a great cruise experience. And I was like, what are you talking about? You can't go to Antarctica.
I think the earliest I heard about it, I was reading an autobiography by William Shatner, and he said that his biggest regret was that years before, because I was reading this book in 2019, and I'm like, what? And he said years before, I forget what year, he had not gone to Antarctica. And I thought, how is it even possible? So that's very bizarre, but that's
I think
really
it's
weird.
I think it's
kind of like the torch. Like you can't go in the torch anymore, but you could,
exactly,
you know?
exactly. Yeah, I think it's since 1967 the public is allowed to go to Antarctica. Maybe not the interior, but you could at least cruise around and visit.
That's crazy. That's like decades.
Exactly.
So the first I heard about it was when everyone was wearing those Fitbits, and it was showing people were moving around all in Antarctica. Did you guys see that when that came out? Because they said it was a national security risk that these Fitbits are giving all these locations, so you could see all these tracks and all these roads appearing down in Antarctica.
Oh,
and then they made them pull. I want to say it was 2018. You guys can help me out in the chat, but yeah.
Okay, cool.
So just real recently, and then I was like, I didn't know people can go down there. So then I assumed they were bases, but then I got to looking closer, and one of them was like a ski resort, and I'm like,
what?
Yeah, you could even zoom in and you could see the lift thing and all that, and I'm like,
no,
I didn't know you could go down there. This was all news to me. So I'm glad you guys are saying this, because I just thought I need to catch up on the news here. I had no idea you could go to Antarctica. So yeah, I'm glad you guys said that.
I'm still getting used to upside down lightning. Like that's a phenomenon that's just come into my awareness, upside down lightning, and how the Washington Monument was hit last week. But I never knew lightning could go upside down.
What do you mean upside down?
I don't know what I mean. it's literally brand new for me today, because I saw somebody posted something about, there's more upside down lightning, and I'm like, upside down lightning. So I went on Wikipedia, and it's a thing. I'd never heard of it. So
yeah, now I do remember them saying the way it works is it actually starts from the ground up, makes the connection, and shoots down or something. But it doesn't actually shoot up. From what we perceive, we just see it shoot down, but the connection is made moments before.
That makes sense.
So.
Well, if we have a lot of questions, might want to get a few more.
Do you want me to do next, or you got it?
Meredith Gansro asks, how do you remember a future memory?
Excellent question. Love that one. That's a really good question, because sometimes when I get a future memory, it looks exactly the same to me as a memory. And then it requires me to go into, remember I talked about the touch, and then you look at something, and then a third level. I have to go to my third level consciousness and observe the whole thing and figure out, is it possible that I could have this memory yet? I actually have to do that. I'll give you an example. I was shopping for a shirt, and I wasn't intentionally shopping for a shirt. I was in a shop where I saw there's these fabulous shirts, well made. It's a designer shop outlet, and I could instantly get this picture of my husband wearing this shirt. I thought, that's odd. It's his favorite shirt. I knew that. It's his favorite shirt. Good. Wait a minute. I don't think there's no way I've been to the store before, have I? No, I've never been to the store before. And it's his favorite shirt. Okay, wait a minute. I was literally like bouncing there for a little bit. So I had to logic it out. Like, okay, if this is the first time I've been to this store, yes, it is. And it's his favorite shirt. I have to buy this shirt. Right. Okay. It could be a little bit, kind of weird.
That's cool though. Very cool. Okay. Let's see. Let me see. Question from Eric Mill. How do we know it is spiraling?
I think he was referring to time spiraling. How do we know? I don't know that we know for sure, but I'm fascinated by the coincidence, if you want to call it that the closed Timelike curves look a lot like the Ouroboros, which is the serpent or dragon biting its tail. It's a very ancient symbol. And here we have scientists saying, here we have closed Timelike curves where space-time paths can return to the same starting point, and enabling us to have time travel, basically, which looks very ancient at the same time. Going back to spirals, I don't know. We see spirals in space-time when you look at the way the planets and the Milky Way and so forth are supposedly moving in spirals. So there's that dynamic. I don't know that we can prove that time is doing anything. I think we need to, first of all, get our levels of awareness so we can process when we've got a future memory versus a past memory. We're still getting our bearings with this right now, in my opinion.
Yeah. So to further that, getting our bearings, Benjamin Brieg asks, so are we sliding into a universe where everyone will know what's going on? Finally.
Oh, that would be great. I would love that. I think inch by inch, millimeter by millimeter, we're getting there. I think we're getting to a place where there's more respect for everyone, and there's a lot more awareness of what others are actually feeling, what they're up to. There's a lot more openness and transparency. So on those levels, we can see evidence of it in our social systems. I don't know how to answer that question exactly, but it reminds me, since I'm talking to you, Chris, that we were talking in the series of glitches when we were off camera, that I love the synchronicity that I saw this sundial as one of my first coming out of the ME closet experiences. It was an opportunity where I had been talking to my friends who are very high level managers at one of our top financial institutions in the United States, in the world. And I'm basically asking, have you guys ever seen these reality shifts that I'm talking about? And right at that exact moment, they're big as life, twice as real, was this enormous, gigantic sundial. And they saw it with me and acknowledged, we've never seen this here before. That was mind-blowing and very symbolic. And then, Christopher, you also witnessed a sundial. And I think that's interesting and quite meaningful. So.
Yeah, so the sundial that I saw was on the side of someone's house that was like right on the road, right next to the road. And the house was like a light color, and the sundial was like a yellowish color. It definitely stood out. It's the same road that I was been traveling like for 20 years, both in my car and on a bike. It would pop out at you. So that was probably one of my first 3 personal Mandela effects that I saw. And you're right, the symbology of the sun and the sundial and time.
And space and time.
Space and time. Exactly.
This is I think it's an Easter egg, and I think it's beyond a synchronicity that you experienced it, I experienced it, and here we are.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love those synchronicities. I mean, a sundial, come on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. And
okay.
I was going to say, I'm really intrigued by the sun. I've been following a lot of the solar activity that's going on, and it's really, really fascinating what's happening with the sun. So
yes, it is.
Nachiketa had a good question. Wouldn't a third observer be needed in the Wigner's Friends experiment in order to know that there are 2 realities at the same time at the same place?
I believe this is a reference to the work of Proietti and Bruckner, a collaborative effort between Vienna, Austria, and Edinburgh, Scotland. And that was the research reported in 2019 based on the 2018 experiment. Would there be a necessity for that third observer? Well, due to the way that they set the device up, they really only required 2 observational devices. Typically with a double slit experiment, you just have 1 observational device. But that's a great question. Don't they need 3? You can check it out, research the paper to see the specifics of their experimental apparatus and design. But I think they did quite well with the 2 detectors. I think they are looking into further detectors. Let's see what we can do with it from here. Because once you get an idea, of course, you want to play with it. You want to take it to the next level. So they needed 2 for this experiment, but I bet you they're working with 3. I would.
That would be the next step, right?
Yeah.
Logically.
yeah, and Nachiketa asks, does the photon detectors affect the photons by observing or measuring them?
That's a great
Okay. Yeah. In the field of quantum physics, the way that you make a measurement is considered to be the observation. So there's not a huge distinction there, which is a little bit of an issue, I think, in terms of some unspoken elephants in the room with quantum physics, like who is the observer exactly? What is this present moment now? That we have some issues where the psychological definition of now is a little different than the physics, and that's I don't really know for that one. That's a good question, meaning not sure how to answer it. Very good one, though.
Perfect. Let's see. We're going to go to AJ, Rip-On Rabbit Hole. Is the spiraling moving inward or outward, or does it shift back and forth? I think that's a great question. Or do we know?
Well, by the spiraling, I guess you're talking about the way we move through time.
Mm-hmm.
We do not know. We're presenting several different theories today. I talked about the orthogonal time concept that we heard from Philip K. Dick, because he was a Mandela Effect experiencer. We've spoken about that several days now in this conference. He really was one of our pioneers. So I love his theories because he deserves to have a voice in it. And thank goodness he wrote some things down. We also today in my presentation looked at the work of John William Dunn. He had that very complicated kind of a model in 3 dimensions with T1, T2, and T3 at orthogonal angles, exactly like what we're hearing about from Philip K. Dick. So I'm not sure about the spiraling thing. What's happening with the spiraling? I think that goes back to the indigenous concept, very much like the cycles of time, like Mayan time. Here we're getting into the work that Evan Maitreya presented at this conference, talking about this. And also, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Eileen Colts also touched on it as well. Again, I can't say for sure what's going on with the spirals. More research is needed. That's what we're here for. What you're hearing, if you're hearing these questions and you'd like to be involved in a future conference, we would love to just pick up, start researching this, really do some research, find the references, see if you can tie things together. Let us know that you're interested, because this is the birth of a new science. There's nothing less than that is what we're doing right now.
And that's the beauty of it, because it's really affecting every area, every field it's affecting. So it's an opportunity for everybody to have something unique to bring to the table, especially the fact that it is a very subjective experience, isn't it?
Yes.
Awesome.
Okay, so looking at another question here, this one I have from Nashikita also. In a closed timeline loop, already I'm confused. In a closed timeline loop, in what is the time looping? To loop means to say that time is passing through some space where it can loop through, no?
Yeah, this is a concept of getting into the topography that we were touching on, I think yesterday. We were talking about topography, could be almost anything. And I believe what's meant here is the closed timelike curves. And this is the work that I was presenting by David Deutsch, physicist David Deutsch. And what's happening, what's going on? It's a little bit like a topographical question. So if you've heard of tesseracts from the fictional work A Wrinkle in Time, you can imagine that you've got this. If you want to do a time jump, you can just go from this flat plane of existence and recognize it's not flat, it curves, and you can touch something. So that curve is where something loops and it comes back on itself. So it brings, obviously we're in Mandela Effect territory. As soon as you've left that flat line, that flat plane, and you've started looping, and you've got another level of perception, then you've got physicists talking about that topography and looking at the closed timelike curve being a way that you could actually time travel. So there could be events that are going on that curve part, but you yourself decide to skip it. You're going to fast track. You're going to take the short path. So instead of looping, you just go zoop and you're right there. You just make that jump.
Sounds like the same thing with wormholes, right? The way they talk about bending in space and then just jumping across.
It's extremely similar. So when you bring these ideas together, you start getting some very interesting conceptualizations. Yes.
Very cool. Okay, a question I really wanted to get to from Daisy is, can you give a real world example of a delayed choice?
A delayed choice. Yeah. I think this happens anytime you've got that influence from your future reaching back to your past. I told you that my future self interacted with me. For many decades, I was waiting to meet her. I was waiting for, where's that moment going to come? When will I be the one that time travels back? When will I do this thing? I realize now it's not going to happen, and it's a very personal story. I can explain what my future self stole and why it's not going to happen. This is fascinating. I'll just make it short, but okay. Here's my take on it now, because it's decades later. This was my first relationship with my first boyfriend. The letters in question are letters he wrote to me about the new Star Wars movie that had just come out. He'd drawn some pictures. I'd only gotten these little notes from him recently. I had them in my roll-top desk in a special secret, known only to me location, which was then stolen from me by my future self. But there's a reason for that. I'm an extremely loyal person, and I tend to stick with things and choices like forever. But when I get interference like I just got there, what happened? My future self came in. What did she take? Letters, the first letters my boyfriend ever gave me. The way I see it now, it gave me permission to recognize this relationship doesn't have to be forever. It's okay to get divorced, even though that's the father of your children. It's okay to move on. I see that now. And I think it was kind of hard to see because I'm in this really weird position in the whole story.
I'm not, all I remember is that I'm the one that had this stolen from me. But I think that kind of thing can happen all the time. Frequently I get insights which feel like intuitive nudges, just to I should wrap this up, but it's I think it's the way we lead our lives when we're intuitive. We get hunches of possible realities that are very close to us. We want to steer away or go a different direction. Getting that kind of help a lot all the time. Not so visually as that one experience where something was stolen, but I needed it that time. So I think I got what I needed.
Absolutely. Awesome. Let's see. We're going to have Jerry come back in, right? Jerry, we have time now for another question. Want to see if we have enough time for another question?
Yeah, I think you've got time. Yeah, Jerry shows up, but then he comes in when it's
okay.
Actually.
Here's one from Jody. Have you heard of any children that say they are seeing Mandela effects? How do you explain that to them?
Yes, I get into this a little bit in my book, Reality Shifts, which I wrote at a time that my daughters were quite young, and they were going through this with me and very open to it. So they would actually say things like, wish for a reality shift or hope for a reality shift. I just explain sometimes things are different. Sometimes they move. The hot water handle works differently. It's like, how come the hot and cold switch, Mommy? I said, well, they seem the same to me, but you know what? Sometimes this happens, and it's just, this happens. So they were so open to it. And they'd say, how come that picture changed? And I'd look at it like, really? You think it's different? What's different? They would describe it. And I think kids are the best. And now we've got the full-blown Mandela effect. So you can actually look at items of shared consciousness, not personal to a household, but common across the entire society. So as the entire society, we're getting to that place of sharing our perceptions at a higher level than we've ever shared before. And I think kids are a wonderful opportunity for all of us to see that innocence, that purity, that awareness, and really trust that when they're telling us things, rather than say, no, that's not true, just take a moment, because parents sometimes can do some damage without realizing it. Instead of arguing, which is very easy to do, and say, like, that's not what happened, just take a moment and say, oh, what did you experience? What's real for you? Let's hear about it.
Perfect. And I like that. I like that answer too, because kids, they don't have all the programming to work there. I find it's harder for us older people to get over and believe something's changed in an impossible way. Jerry, yes. How is it, my man?
Hey guys, how we doing? What a stimulating and fascinating conversation this has been.
Thank you. Yeah, I love it.
We'll hold the questions that we didn't get through for the panel later, you guys. So don't worry.
I'll tell you what, there were some amazing questions coming in.
Actually, correct me.
Yeah. Well, today it's not the normal panel. Usually we do a regular panel. Today it's the IMEC view. So it's going to be a little bit more about the topics that people just want to bring up and raise themselves. We absolutely could bring some of this food for thought into that IMEC view, of course, but it's a little bit different today. So I just want to put that out there.
That's right.
So, yeah.
Perfect segue to talk about that. Jerry.
All right, Cynthia, thank you so much for such an amazing talk and Q&A session. It's been absolutely stimulating.
My pleasure. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Chris and Shane and Jerry.
It's great.
And Christopher, thank you so much for helping mod this event today. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
As well as Mr. Shane Robinson as the moderator of this event also.
Honored. Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you guys for being here. It is very, very sincerely appreciated.